Ucrania denunció este viernes que ataques rusos con drones estaban dirigidos al aeródromo de Colombia. Según dijeron, los objetivos eran los pilotos que pronto comenzarían sus entrenamientos con aviones F-16 de fabricación estadounidense. Un portavoz de la Fuerza Aérea dijo que Moscú pretendía evitar que los militares se adiestraran con las últimas tecnologías occidentales, pero aclaró que no tuvieron éxito en su propósito. Uno de los misiles lanzados por Rusia fue derribado en Kiev, sin embargo, no está claro qué pasó con los otros.
A UN humanitarian official says she's appalled by a Russian strike on a hotel frequently used by the organization and various NGOs in Ukraine. It happened on Thursday in the city of Zaporiyia. Ukraine says one person was killed and 16 others were wounded. The building also serves as a children's day camp, which closed for the day just an hour before the strike. In the northeast, Ukraine has ordered an evacuation of civilians from the city of Kupiansk, which is under Russian military pressure, while in the south, the front lines are largely holding despite reports of heavy fighting amid Ukraine's ongoing counteroffensive. Ukrainian officials say Moscow is now rushing reinforcements from Crimea while pulling back a lot of damaged military equipment. So for more on this, we're joined by Stuart Crawford, a defense analyst and a former lieutenant colonel in the British Army, and he's speaking with us from Edinburgh. Thanks so much for being here with us. So we've been reporting that officials both inside and outside Ukraine now admit advances in the offensive are coming more slowly than they'd hoped. Why is that? What are some of the challenges that they're facing out there?
Yes, good morning. The offensives are very, very slow indeed, because basically the Ukrainian armed forces, in simple terms, aren't strong enough yet. And the Russian forces have had a considerable amount of time to prepare their defenses. And if you look at the map, we're talking about prepared defenses, which in some places are 30 kilometers deep. And it's a major and difficult operation of war to breach those defenses, particularly when neither side has got air superiority.
The Russians, they seem better at defending than they've been at attacking.
Yes, I think that's the case. I think historically that's always been the case. The Russian military doctrine is very much top-down, directed from above, whereas in Western circles, there's much more initiative allowed at junior levels of command, very much like the German model during the Second World War, which both the US and Britain and other NATO allies have adopted. So that's where we are at the moment. The Ukrainians aren't strong enough, and the Russians are too strong at the moment.
Well, just to give one example of one of the challenges, for instance, when Ukrainians breach minefields, for instance, then the Russians can just sow them again. I mean, what effect does that have?
Well, I mean, absolutely right. Breaching a minefield is a very complex and difficult operation. And it's not just the engineers who go in first and clear the mines out of the way. They have to be protected both against ground fire and attack from the air. And once they clear a path through the minefield or a partial path through the minefield, the Russians have the capability of remotely delivering mines on the bit that's been cleared and actually behind the engineers. So it's incredibly complex and dangerous.
And in Washington, President Biden is asking Congress for another $24 billion in aid for Ukraine and other international needs. But he'll be up against some Republicans who are skeptical of providing more help. More on all this, Salma Abdelaziz joins us from London. So Salma, what more are we learning about that horrific hotel attack?
Let me just start, Kim, with some breaking news that we've only received just in the last few minutes. This is coming from Kyiv city local officials that say that hypersonic missiles have been fired. These are Kinzhal missiles that have been fired towards the capital. They say that their air defense systems are working, but they're calling on all families to take shelter. So a great deal of terror and fear in the capital this morning. But straight to those front lines, Kim, of course, where Ukrainian officials say that Russian troops are making an attempt to pull them, to distract them from that southern front, which of course has been key for Kyiv's fight in this counteroffensive towards the north, towards Kharkiv. In fact, so intense has the Russian assault been towards the Kharkiv region that one city, Kupiansk, has had to order mandatory evacuations for all residents. Officials there saying that the city has been struck by air assaults dozens of times a day. Kyiv's troops saying that Russia has sent in troop reinforcements, airborne division reinforcements, trying again to pull Ukraine's focus towards the north. And that's really what we're seeing throughout this conflict, of course, Kim. It yet again presents that issue of these very long front lines, hundreds of miles of active fighting where Ukrainian forces are stretched very thin and consistently trying to react to Russian air superiority, which has continued, of course, to hold Ukraine back in certain areas. And that means there's very few gains that we've seen in recent months since the launch of this counteroffensive, while at the same time, with very few successes in hand again, President Biden going to Congress asking for more help, more support, $24 billion in additional aid. That includes humanitarian assistance and security assistance. He's absolutely set for a showdown in Congress this fall, Kim.
Yeah, and we're seeing not only just resistance from Republican politicians, but from more Americans at large. I just want to show you a poll here recently. CNN found 55% of Americans say Congress shouldn't authorize more funding for Ukraine. So we're seeing U.S. support for Ukraine slowly fading, which in the context of Ukraine's offensive, which you were just talking about, adds some political pressure on top of the obvious, military and strategic drivers here.
Absolutely. I mean, Kyiv's fight, Kyiv's needs on the front lines are absolutely linked to the U.S. election next year. Mentioning that poll again, just to give you a point of comparison, last February, when a similar poll was conducted, 62% of Americans said they believe that the United States should do more to help Ukraine. So a huge shift there over the course of the last year and a half or so, and that's being reflected, of course, in Congress, where there is skepticism, among the Republican Party. That's not to say that all Republicans are against additional funding to Ukraine. In fact, some, of course, have continued to call for additional assistance, saying it's absolutely imperative for the safety and security and future of NATO to counter Russian aggression on the ground. President Biden, of course, already trying to sell this new aid package. A White House spokesperson saying, look, just think of the cost of this. We are fighting, providing help for the fight for Ukraine. At the same time, this gives NATO what it needs on the ground against Russian aggression. It's all really going to play out this fall, but it's going to be a tough battle, especially, again, Kim, with few successes in hand so far.